Good morning. We are in Isaiah chapter 10, and we are going to complete through chapter 12, which is going to finish up the Messiah section that we talked about earlier. Chapter 10 is really a continuation for the first 4 verses of chapter 9. It begins with a woe, W-O-E, which is just, the New Living Translation says, what sorrow awaits. We talked about woe being a judgment. In the Jewish Study Bible, it says ha, H-A, exclamation point. It's just a pronouncement. And these first 4 verses are a continuation of the judgment against Israel because of their unrighteousness. What sorrow awaits the unjust judges and those who issue unfair laws. They deprive the poor of justice and deny the rights of the needy among my people. They prey on widows and take advantage of orphans. What will you do when I punish you, when I send disaster upon you from a distant land? To whom will you turn for help? Where will your treasures be safe? You will stumble along as prisoners or lie among the dead, and even the Lord's anger will not be satisfied. His fist is still poised to strike. The character of a nation, the character of a people, determines how they behave to those who are not capable of caring for themselves, who have no elevation or superiority in culture. As God's church, we're responsible for those who are in need. And then beginning in verse 5, there is a judgment against Assyria. That's kind of interesting. It goes over through verse 19. Assyria is the nation that God uses to bring justice upon his people because of their disobedience, because of their total disregard for him and for his laws. And very, very quickly, I know I do too much history, but Assyria came to power and expanded over a 200-year period, say from 911 to 627 BC. And during that time, they conquered Israel in 722 BC and Babylon in 729 BC. And they began immediately a downfall and were conquered. Very quick rise, expansion, and a very quick decline. And of course, we know the reason why. Isaiah gives them the reason why. In verse 5, he says, what sorrow awaits Assyria. And then he defines them, the rod of my anger. I used it as a club to express my anger. I'm sending Assyria against a godless nation, against a people with whom I'm angry. Who is that? It's Israel. It's God's people. They weren't obeying him. They were disrespectful. And so he uses a godless nation to bring judgment upon his people. Assyria will plunder them, trampling them like dirt beneath its feet. But verse 7, you need to underline, but the king of Assyria will not understand that he is my tool. His brain just simply doesn't work that way. He thought that as he expanded his kingdom and as he conquered peoples and nations, that it was because of his smartness, because of his military. Look down at verse 10. He says, yes, we have finished off many a kingdom whose gods were greater than those in Jerusalem and Samaria. So we will defeat Jerusalem and her gods just as we destroyed Samaria with hers. He really believes that he is his military greatness is because of his own power. Verse 12, but after the Lord had used the king of Assyria to accomplish his purposes on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, he will turn against the king of Assyria and punish him. Why? Because he is proud and arrogant, and he boasts. And then Isaiah gives these next several verses as an example of what Assyria thought of their own power. It's a dramatic and a very comprehensive destruction, judgment of Assyria. In verse 15, he gives this interesting comparison. In verse 15 it says, but can the axe boast greater power than the person who uses it? Is the saw greater than the person who saws? Can a rod strike unless a hand moves it? Can a wooden cane walk by itself? Therefore, because of all this, the power is not in you, but it's in God. He said, therefore, because of this, the Lord of heaven's armies will send a plague among Assyria's proud troops. Notice they're not defeated militarily, but it's God who brings judgment upon them, and a flaming fire will consume its glory. The Lord, the light of Israel, will be a fire. The Holy One will be a flame. He still acknowledges his covenant with Israel and his promise to them to bring them back from this destruction. Verse 18, the Lord will consume Assyria's glory like a fire consumes a forest in a fruitful land. It will waste away like sick people in a plague. Of all that glorious forest, only a few trees will survive, so few that a child can count them. Assyria, when it defeated Israel, it's another king who comes in and tries to attack and is beat back from conquering Jerusalem. But the Assyrian Empire is destroyed. Of course, there are political and military reasons behind it, and a secular world would look at that and say, well, Assyria was defeated because of this, this, and this. But Isaiah says that whoever the Lord backs, that's who's going to win. And so we have the downfall of the Assyrian Empire after they are used as a judgment for the nation of Israel. But this entire scripture, from the first chapter of Genesis to the very last chapter of Revelation, there's always consistent principles that happen. The first is the providence of God, the fact that He knows from start to finish what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and how He can move events to complete His will. There's the desire for His people to be faithful and to be true. And judgment when they don't. There are consequences to actions. But there's always the promise of redemption. The fact that He is faithful to His word, and that we have that promise to look forward to. And that begins from verse 20 to verse 34 in that 10th chapter. Hope for the people of the Lord. Verse 20, in that day, what day? What day? Remember that Isaiah is talking about different times. He's talking about the end of the Assyrian kingdom, but he's also talking about that time, in the end of time, when the Lord returns and establishes His kingdom on this earth. Read what he says. In that day, The remnant left in Israel, the survivors in the house of Jacob, will no longer depend on allies who seek to destroy them, but they will faithfully trust the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return. Verse 22, but though the people of Israel are as numerous as the sand in the seashore, only a remnant of them will return. The Lord has rightly decided to destroy his people. Yes, the Lord of heaven's armies, has already decided to destroy the entire land. But he says, don't be afraid, because the Assyrians, when they oppress you with rod and club, as the Egyptians did, in a little while, after you're purified, after you are brought to face with your own inadequacies and you understand my power, then my anger will rise up to destroy them. And he will destroy the enemies of Israel. Verse 27, in that day, the Lord will end the bondage of his people. He will break the yoke of slavery and lift it from their shoulders. And then he goes through not just a geographical area, but he will remind them of the movements of the Assyrians, and he will heal those wounds. He will cut down the proud, and the destruction will be complete. Chapter 11 is a wonderful prophecy, not just for the remnant of the Israelite nation, but for the church, for those believers in the Messiah. This will be so easy for us to understand. In that very first verse of chapter 11, it says, out of the stump of David's family will grow a shoot. Yes, a new branch bearing fruit from the old fruit. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, have you ever cut down a big old oak tree and you think it's dead, and you go back a little later and there's a little shoot coming forth, and you think, man, I thought that thing was dead. But there's just enough life in it to bring back that thought of a new life, of a new beginning. And that's exactly what he's talking about. And he ties it directly into David's family. Verse 2 begins these characteristics of the Messiah, of this one who will rule at the end of time. And he says, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. Listen to the description. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, power, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. He will delight in obeying the Lord. And contrary, so contrary, this entire chapter is so contrary to the way our culture is, or the way we think about things. He says, he will delight in obeying the Lord. He will not judge by appearance, nor make a decision based on hearsay. There won't be any People magazines in this time, because nobody's going to care how good you look or how bad you look. It's going to be what's on the inside. Verse 4, he will give justice equally across the board to the poor, and make fair decisions for the exploited. The earth will shake at the force of his word, and one breath from his mouth will destroy the wicked. He will wear righteousness like a belt and truth like an undergarment. I just can't even imagine, but how glorious it will be to know that righteousness and justice will be extended for everybody. In fact, in that end time, during that millennial reign of Christ upon this earth, everything is going to be so upside down from the way we think about it that it's even going to affect nature. Look at verse from 8 down through, let's see, from verse 6 down through verse 9. YouTube. I love to watch YouTube, and I love to watch the lions and the cougars and the panthers attack their prey. I know that sounds strange, but it's like the predator and the prey, and that's not going to exist. That relationship, that nature, is not going to exist during the millennium. Look what it says: in that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. The calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion. That's not gonna, that's anti-everything, nature. And a little child will lead them all. The cow will graze near the bear. The cub and the calf will lie down together. The lion will eat hay like a cow. When God's rule comes, there will be no predators. There will be no evil. There will be peace, so that even enemies lie down together, break bread together, no animosity. Look at verse 8 is great. The baby will play near the hole of a cobra. And yes, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. To not have to worry about your children. To know that they're safe. Nothing will hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For as the waters fill the sea, so the earth will be filled with people who know the Lord. What an amazing testament to peace of God. And not only will it extend to nature, but it will also extend to mankind and to politics. The nations will rally to him, and the land where he lives will be a glorious place. The last half of verse 12 is a prophecy that people have been exploring for years and finding events to fit this verse. It says, he will gather the scattered people of Judah from the ends of the earth. His people will be returned. That remnant will be returned, and there will be peace. Verse 13 is really interesting because he talks about the unity that will exist even in Israel. The civil war that divided them, no more. Then at last the jealousy between Israel and Judah will end, and they will not be rivals anymore. That goes back almost from the beginning of time. And it mentions the geography of the people, how they will return. It is a prophetic promise of power and of God's protection. We know that salvation is from the Lord, and chapter 11 is a description of that salvation, of that peace. The attributes that he mentions of the Lord, wisdom and understanding and counsel and strength and knowledge and fear, to live in that time will be awesome. A new world order beyond what man can even begin to understand. And then chapter 12 closes out this section on Emmanuel. And we have to read the whole thing. In that day, in that final time, you will sing, I will praise you, O Lord. You were angry with me, but not anymore. Now you comfort me. See, God has come to save me. I will trust in him and not be afraid. The Lord God is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. With joy you will drink deeply from the fountain of salvation. In that wonderful day you will sing. Thank the Lord, praise his name. Tell the nations what he has done. Let them know how mighty he is. Sing to the Lord, for he has done wonderful things. Make known his praise around the world. Let all the people of Jerusalem shout his praise with joy. For great is the Holy One of Israel who lives among you. A promise of salvation, a promise of peace. The next verses from 13 through 28, we're going to cover rapidly. I know you don't believe I can do that, but we can. It will be a pronouncement of all the different nations who have opposed Israel and Judah. And I promise we'll try to finish those rapidly. Don't forget Sunday school starts at 9:30. The book of Isaiah is a promise of great salvation, a promise of the future. Bye.